Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The noise of the world. Have you ever asked yourself why you feel that irresistible pull to respond, to defend, to justify, to explain yourself, even when no one really asked? Think about it. A friend makes a passing remark, and before you even pause, you rush to clarify. A stranger questions you, and your tongue races ahead of your mind to prove a point. Later, when the heat of the moment has cooled, you regret it. You wish you had stayed quiet. You wish you had let silence do the work. This pattern is not a coincidence. It is not a natural instinct, it is conditioning. You were raised in a world where speaking is confused with strength. Where silence is mistaken for weakness. From classrooms to workplaces, from family tables to online debates, the message drilled into you is the same: if you don't speak, you don't matter. Society repeats the lie that silence means agreement, that not reacting is surrender, and that to hold your tongue is to lose power. And so, you carry this belief unconsciously, letting it rule your every interaction. But here is the paradox: the very habit you were taught to admire is the one that robs you of strength. Every impulsive response gives away a part of you. Every reaction exposes your emotions. Every justification reveals your insecurity. You hand over your control the moment you cannot remain silent. Now pause for a second. How many times has your quick reaction placed you in a weaker position? How many times have you spoken too much, explained too much, only to realize you gave the other person more ammunition? If you are honest, the answer is many. And deep down, you know it. The reason this cycle continues is because we live in an age of noise. The 21st century is not defined by silence but by shouting. Turn anywhere: your phone, your television, the streets, the office, even family gatherings, and what you hear is constant talk. Everyone wants to be heard, yet almost no one truly listens. Even worse, silence itself has become unbearable. A long pause in a conversation feels like a heavy weight. Sitting in a quiet room feels suffocating. People rush to fill the gap with words, with music, with notifications, with anything that avoids the sharpness of stillness. Why? Because silence is uncomfortable. It exposes. It reveals. It offers no escape. Noise allows you to hide, but silence forces you to meet yourself face to face. That is why most people drown themselves in chatter. Not because they have something meaningful to say, but because they are terrified of what comes up when nothing is said. And yet, here lies a forgotten truth, one that philosophers like Nietzsche understood with frightening clarity. True power does not belong to those who shout the loudest. True power belongs to those who remain unshaken in silence. While the crowd burns its energy in endless noise, the master observes, waits, calculates. And when he chooses to speak, the world leans forward to listen. Nietzsche called this the will to power, but not in the crude sense of domination over others. He meant the ability to rule oneself, the strength to restrain the impulse to react, the courage to resist the need to prove, the discipline to stay unmoved in the face of provocation. For him, silence was not absence. It was mastery. A silence filled with intention, dense with presence, sharper than any sword. Think about this carefully. In every heated debate, the person who reacts the fastest is usually the one most out of control. They expose their wounds, their triggers, their vulnerabilities. But the one who holds their silence, who does not flinch, who waits, that is the one who commands the room. Not by force, not by volume, but by presence. This is the lesson you were never taught: reacting is often surrendering. But silence, true silence, when chosen deliberately, becomes one of the most powerful weapons you can wield. It is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is the quiet strength that unsettles others, because they cannot move you. And so, before you go further, consider this challenge: can you sit with silence without trying to fill it? Can you hold back the reflex to justify yourself? Can you let your stillness speak louder than your words? The answer to these questions will determine whether you remain enslaved by noise, or whether you begin to master the hidden art of silence. The mirror of silence. Why does silence disturb us so deeply? Why is it that a single pause in conversation makes the air feel heavier, almost unbearable? Have you noticed how, when you stop talking, the other person rushes to fill the gap, even with meaningless words, just to escape the discomfort? This is not a coincidence. It is one of the clearest signs of silence's psychological power. Silence is not empty. It is revealing. It is a mirror that reflects what people are trying to hide, and most of us do not like what we see. In the absence of noise, there are no distractions, no escape routes. What you suppress every day, your doubts, your guilt, your fears, your regrets, slowly begins to surface. And that is terrifying. Think of how we live. Constant messages, notifications, conversations, endless background noise, television humming, music streaming, chatter in cafes, the scrolling of social media. We are surrounded by 1,000 voices because we have become afraid of being left alone with the only voice that truly matters, our own. We run from silence not because it has nothing to offer, but because it offers too much. It forces us to face the truth. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist, persists." And what does modern man resist more than anything? His own emptiness. His own shadow. His own silence. We resist it because it is raw. It strips away the masks we wear in public. It tears down the stories we tell ourselves. It reminds us of how fragile and unsettled we really are beneath the surface. Nietzsche understood this sickness long before psychologists gave it names. He saw a humanity drowning in distraction, not suffering from too much pain, but from too much noise. For him, noise was not just sound, it was a disease. Endless talking, shallow opinions, cheap debates, arguments over nothing, all of it existed to cover up the unbearable weight of facing the self. But silence destroys this illusion. When you allow silence to take hold, the games stop. The performances crumble. All that remains is you. And if you have spent your whole life avoiding yourself, that moment feels like torture. Think about a simple example. When you are alone in a quiet room, how quickly does your hand reach for your phone? How fast do you turn on the television or put on music? Anything, absolutely anything, feels better than sitting in stillness with your own thoughts. Because in stillness, the unresolved rises. The past comes knocking. Your anxieties whisper. Your longings that you have buried begin to stir. And silence gives them space to breathe. This is why so many people mistake silence for weakness. To them, it looks like absence. But in reality, silence is resistance. It is rebellion against a culture that tells you that your value lies only in your words, your reactions, your noise. When you dare to remain silent, you break that cycle. You refuse to play the game. And in that refusal, you regain sovereignty over yourself. Silence is not passivity. It is not surrender. It is active. It is an act of power. To remain quiet when provoked is not to bow, it is to stand higher. To listen deeply while others compete to be heard is not weakness, it is discipline. To hold your tongue while the world shouts is not loss, it is defiance. But here's the key, silence must be conscious. Unconscious silence, born out of fear or insecurity, has no strength. But deliberate silence, chosen with intention, becomes a fortress. It shields you not by hiding you, but by grounding you in presence. It forces others to face themselves in the mirror of your stillness. And very often, they cannot. This is why silence unsettles people so much. When you remain calm, they grow restless. When you don't respond, they reveal more than they wanted to. When you say nothing, they project their own insecurities onto the blank canvas you provide. Without realizing it, they expose themselves while you remain untouchable. In truth, silence is not absence at all, it is amplified presence. It does not erase you from the room. It makes you impossible to ignore. And this is why mastering silence is such a dangerous power. It forces both you and those around you to confront reality without the comfort of noise. It strips away pretense. It reveals fragility. And it plants a question in the minds of others that can shake them to their core. If they are not speaking, what do they know that I don't? In the next stage of this journey, we will see how silence, when wielded with precision, becomes more than just a mirror, it becomes a weapon. Not to destroy others, but to shift the balance of power in your favor. To dominate, not by raising your voice, but by withholding it. Strategic silence. Up to this point, we've explored how silence exposes and unsettles. It mirrors insecurities, it reveals fragility, and it forces confrontation with truths that words usually conceal. But here comes the sharper edge of the blade. Silence is not only revealing, it is strategic. Used deliberately, silence is one of the most powerful weapons in human interaction. The difference lies in intention. There is the silence of fear, and there is the silence of mastery. The fearful person stays quiet because they are timid, unsure, or insecure. Their silence is hollow, defensive, and fragile. But the master stays quiet because they choose to. Their silence is dense, intentional, and heavy with presence. The first type of silence lowers one's position, the second elevates it. Nietzsche's vision of the Übermensch, the overman, was built on this distinction. He did not see silence as retreat but as superiority. For him, silence was the affirmation of the will to power, not through domination over others, but through self-control. The one who holds silence in the heat of confrontation is not defeated. They are calculating. They are choosing the terrain of battle. Consider an argument. One person talks endlessly, explaining, justifying, trying to win. The other sits still, speaks little, or perhaps says nothing at all. Who commands the room? It is not the one spilling words but the one whose silence creates tension. Because tension is power. The talker exposes their insecurities with every sentence. The silent one forces the opponent to unravel, to project, to overextend. Silence destabilizes. This is why leaders who speak sparingly often dominate without raising their voices. Their pauses make every word heavier. Their restraint forces others to listen more closely. Their silence carries authority. You have probably experienced this, being in front of someone who, with a long pause or a single glance, made you rethink your words before you spoke them. That is not coincidence, it is mastery of silence. Psychologists call this nonverbal status communication. High-status individuals speak less, pause longer, and measure their words as if they were gold. Because they are. The more one speaks, the cheaper their words become. The less one speaks, the more value each word carries. Silence, then, is not absence, it is amplification. It multiplies the weight of what follows. Think of it like music. A pause in a song does not weaken it. On the contrary, the silence between notes gives rhythm, drama, and impact. Likewise, in human communication, silence sets the stage for power. A single well-placed sentence after a long pause can pierce more deeply than an hour of arguments. Nietzsche understood this intuitively. He knew that people who talk endlessly are selling themselves cheap, handing over their emotional maps to anyone willing to listen. But the one who resists the urge to react maintains control. The one who does not reveal their wounds keeps their power intact. And here is the key: strategic silence does not mean withdrawal. It is not about hiding in the shadows, refusing to engage with life. It is about mastering rhythm. Knowing when to speak and when not to. Choosing your moments. In silence, you gather energy, and when you decide to release it, through one gesture, one phrase, one decision, it strikes with the force of 10,000 words. Strategic silence works because it unsettles the human need for constant response. People expect noise. They expect defense, explanation, reaction. When they meet silence instead, they panic. They try harder to provoke. They speak more, exposing themselves. They reveal what they should have hidden. Meanwhile, you remain firm, untouchable, unreadable. But for silence to become truly strategic, it must rest on a foundation of strength. Empty silence, used without confidence, will eventually collapse. You cannot fake it for long. Strategic silence gains its density from within, from a place where you no longer crave validation, where your worth does not depend on anyone's recognition. Without that inner solidity, silence can be mistaken for weakness. With it, silence becomes dominance. This is why the next step in our journey is solitude. Because solitude is the forge where silence becomes dense, where presence becomes impenetrable, and where strategy is sharpened into identity. The silence of solitude is not avoidance, it is alchemy. And only from that alchemy does silence transform from a tactic into a way of being. The solitude within. Strategic silence, as we have seen, is not a trick. It cannot be faked. To carry silence with real weight, you must have a foundation beneath it, a center of gravity that does not shake. And that foundation is solitude. Without solitude, silence becomes thin, hollow, and fragile. With solitude, silence becomes dense, magnetic, and unbreakable. But here lies the problem: most people fear solitude. They treat it like a punishment, like a prison sentence. The moment they are left alone, they rush to escape. They fill the room with music, turn on the television, scroll endlessly, or seek out the company of anyone, just to avoid the sharpness of being alone with themselves. To them, loneliness is unbearable. Why? Because it strips away distractions. It tears away the audience. It forces you to face yourself without masks. Nietzsche saw this differently. For him, solitude was not exile but privilege. It was the workshop of the spirit, the place where strength was forged. He believed that individuality is not discovered in the noise of society, but in the silence of being alone. Only in solitude can the human being stop being a draft and start becoming a masterpiece. He who cannot endure solitude does not love freedom, Nietzsche wrote. That statement cuts deep, because everyone claims to want freedom, but very few are willing to pay its price. Freedom means independence from validation. Freedom means existing fully even when no one is watching. And most people cannot stand that. They only feel alive when others confirm their worth, when applause reassures them, when company distracts them. Solitude terrifies them because it reveals how dependent they really are. But here is the paradox: the stronger your solitude, the stronger your presence in the world. The one who has learned to stand alone carries a different energy when among others. They no longer seek approval in every glance or validation in every response. They have already anchored themselves within. And that anchoring makes their silence thunderous. Solitude is not emptiness. It is alchemy. It transforms your inner chaos into order. It brings to the surface what the noise of life has suffocated: your forgotten desires, your hidden wounds, your true voice. In solitude, you stop running. You listen. You allow silence to clean you, to dissolve illusions, to strip away what is unnecessary. And in that cleansing, your silence becomes something more than restraint. It becomes truth. Think of solitude as a forge. When metal is placed into fire, it is melted, reshaped, hardened. Solitude does the same to the soul. It melts away false identities, reshapes character, hardens presence. It takes away the desperation for attention and replaces it with quiet confidence. The silence that arises from this space is not defensive. It does not need to prove anything. It simply is. This is why Nietzsche admired those who could endure isolation. The ordinary person flees from solitude because it confronts them with their internal chaos. The strong person seeks it, knowing that within that chaos lies the seed of transformation. The weak man escapes the mirror. The strong man stares into it until he recognizes himself. And here lies a crucial truth: only from solitude does strategic silence gain its full weight. If you are silent just to appear strong, people will eventually sense the hollowness. But if your silence rises from a place of inner solidity, no one can shake it. Because you are no longer holding silence as a tactic, you are silence itself. You do not need to react because you have already conquered the battlefield within. Solitude, then, is not withdrawal from life. It is preparation for it. It is where the roots grow deep so that the tree can withstand the storm. It is where silence stops being an act and becomes a presence. And once you carry that presence, you no longer chase respect, you command it without asking. In the next chapter, we will see how this transformation reaches its highest point, when silence is not just a weapon, not just a strategy, but an identity. When you no longer use silence but live silence. And in that state, true strength finally reveals itself. Silence as power, silence as identity. There comes a moment when silence is no longer a tactic, no longer just a shield against noise or a pause between words. It becomes something deeper. It becomes identity. When this happens, silence stops being a choice you struggle to make, it becomes your natural state of being. You no longer use silence, you are silence. This transformation marks the highest point of inner strength. Because now silence is not only defensive, not only strategic, it is absolute presence. It is authority without effort. In a world addicted to noise, the one who embodies silence rises above the crowd without even trying. They no longer compete to be heard. They dominate simply by existing. Think of a heated argument. One person speaks rapidly, trying to prove their point, raising their voice, throwing accusations. The other stands calm, silent, unshaken. Who holds the true power in that moment? The noisy one looks desperate, grasping for control. The silent one radiates control by refusing to be pulled into the chaos. Silence here is not emptiness, it is verdict. It says, your words cannot touch me. You do not deserve my energy. Nietzsche understood this brutal clarity. He saw that silence can cut deeper than words. Well-placed silence is a denial, a refusal, an act of hierarchy. It does not beg, it does not explain, it does not seek approval. It simply declares, I have nothing to prove. And in that declaration lies psychological dominance. Silence at this level is not passivity. It is not cowardice. It is restraint born from mastery. The weak remain silent because they cannot speak. The strong remain silent because they do not need to. This is the silence of the Übermensch, the overman, who has transcended the compulsion to react, to justify, to defend. His silence is not timid. It is confident. It is not withdrawal. It is presence magnified. And something remarkable happens when silence becomes identity. Words themselves gain new weight. A single sentence spoken after long silence carries the impact of a hammer strike. A small gesture, a glance, an expression, these suddenly have more influence than entire speeches. Because silence surrounds them, frames them, amplifies them. Noise dilutes meaning, silence concentrates it. But silence as identity also requires the deepest discipline. It demands that you abandon the addiction to validation. Most people talk because they are insecure. They explain because they are desperate to be understood. They defend themselves because they do not feel solid enough to stand without approval. When you rise above this, you no longer chase recognition. You are recognition. At this stage, silence becomes not only a shield, not only a strategy, but a form of communication in itself. It speaks without sound. It imposes itself without violence. It changes the room without effort. People listen to you differently. They feel your presence before you utter a single word. They think twice before challenging you. And when you finally do speak, they know it is not noise, it is necessity. But there is another dimension, silence heals. It cleanses your life of what is unnecessary. It strips away illusions. It dissolves the shallow games of ego. In silence, you find that you are no longer desperate to win battles that don't matter. You no longer waste energy proving yourself to those who never mattered. You conserve your strength for what is real, what is necessary, what is eternal. This is why true power is silent. Because it already is. It does not seek. It does not chase. It does not defend. It simply radiates. And that radiation changes everything. The path to this silence is not easy. It demands solitude. It demands patience. It demands that you endure the discomfort of being unseen until you realize that being unseen is the very source of your freedom. But once you cross that threshold, once silence ceases to be effort and becomes identity, the world sees you differently. You no longer walk into a room looking for respect. You carry it with you. So ask yourself now, will you continue to be enslaved by noise, reacting to every provocation, justifying every choice, explaining every thought? Or will you learn to embody silence, not as weakness, not as escape, but as power? If you dare, take that step. Stop chasing. Stop proving. Stop reacting. Carry silence within you as your strength. And when the world screams, remain still. Because in the end, the strongest voice is the one that does not need to speak.